Welcome back to the Let's Talk Universal podcast, where we explore the next evolutionary phase of the workforce, asking experts and consultants their opinion on diversity, equity and inclusion, the future of work, and leadership and culture. Today, I am very pleased to be joined by Jarell Bempong, mental health, diversity, equity and inclusion facilitator and speaker, psychotherapist and life coach. There's quite a few titles there, Jarell.
I know. I struggle to describe my job title.
Yeah, it's like you hit on quite a few different areas there, and of course the work that you're doing with organizations is so important. But let's begin with just starting off with your personal experience. You know, I'd like to learn a little bit more about you. I've not had the chance to speak with you yet, so do you mind just telling us a little bit more about you?
Yeah, so basically what I do is I kind of wrap all of those job titles up into kind of a umbrella term as a cultural consciousness catalyst, right? So in whatever I do, whatever hat I'm wearing, what I'm doing is being a catalyst for cultural consciousness and awareness, sensitivity, and all of that stuff. And I use that as a bridge between mental health and diversity, equality, and inclusion to fill that gap within that space, right?
Yeah.
So all of my job title, hence the therapist, life coach, facilitator, you know, author, all of those titles kind of are born out of necessity in order for me to be that catalyst, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what is it about this work that you enjoy so much?
So for me, it was born as a lot of it is born out of necessity, right? So the first one of those job titles was a therapist. I was a therapist and a life coach before all of those other titles came about. And it was my journey towards becoming a therapist and overcoming my own mental health challenges as a Black, gay, dyslexic man, you know, English Ghanaian, you know, and all of the complexity and layers that come within that, and having the realization of the impact that that has on my mental health and the challenges and barriers that I was faced in either seeking mental health care or educating myself to become the therapist is really the driving force, because it was met with a full wall of, you know, adversity and challenges that I had no idea, because in my mind I was like, I just want to be a therapist, and you know, I need support in my mental health. But I didn't realize that for someone with, you know, a minority identity or with intersecting minority identities, you know, such as mine, I had no idea the challenges we'll face. So the passion and drive behind it is, for me, whenever as a therapist with my clients, and my clients will tell you, any workshops that attendees will tell you, I'm like, the trauma and the contrast is a good thing, right? It lets us know I'm alive. After all, when people are on life support and you see that machine, that line going up and down, if it's flat, you know they're in trouble, right?
Yeah.
But if it's going up and down, then that means they're alive. And that's a good thing, right? So I've learned to understand that those ups and downs in life are part of the necessity. But what I do with the downs is that now I've learned to overcome that and turn those downs into ups, right? Use it as an opportunity rather than a failure or a loss or a trauma, you know. So that's really become the passion and driving force, using kind of trauma and mental illness and suffering and pain and all of those human conditions that we experience growing up in life and come about through no fault of our own, through society, through culture, through tradition, through religion, through politics, through you name it. But we have to bear the brunt of it and kind of work through that. So I stand up for the marginalized, the freaks, the minorities, the oddballs, the misfits. I champion their cause. So
and I think Yeah, I think with things like mental health as well, I think a lot of people in a lot of different backgrounds and experiences do have mental health challenges. It's something that at some point in a person's life they've had to manage or to deal with, and I think it's such an important thing to be talking about, professionally and personally.
To be honest, nobody living or who has ever lived has not suffered from mental health problems.
Mm-hmm.
It's a human condition.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone who would fool themselves to say, oh, I don't suffer from any sort of trauma at all, and I don't have any mental health issues, then they would be actually lying to themselves, and maybe they need the therapist the most.
Yeah.
Right.
And how would you tie in neurodiversity or neurodivergence with mental health? Because I think in some ways there are people who might consider mental health challenges underneath that neurodiversity umbrella, but how do you relate the two?
So being dyslexic myself, I can give you a really nice window on that because I'm a dyslexic therapist. So when it comes to certain types of neurodiversity like dyslexia, I can speak from my own point of view on this perfectly. So when it comes to dyslexia or other learning difficulties, it manifests very young when you realize that you're struggling. Everyone seems to be kind of getting it.
Yeah.
And you realize that you're struggling. And then if the people around you are not aware of neurodiversity and learning difficulties, then you kind of eat the belief that you are not clever, not good enough, not academic.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's a baseline irrational core belief that triggers unhealthy, irrational emotions, actions, thought patterns, behaviors, all of that, but it embeds at a very young age. See, so it also breeds other things like insecurity, maybe trying to overcompensate, maybe shrinking away, overthinking, self-hating, all sorts of myriad shame. There's a myriad of things that come from that early stage when the neurodivergent is realizing that they're divergent in a ableist society. And there's no one else really around them who really understands them or is like them. So immediately the thought is to go to, I'm odd. I'm weird. I'm not good enough. I'm different. And that internal othering starts.
And then how does that impact them in their careers as they move? Maybe we could frame this in a corporate sense, but how does this then affect the trajectory of their careers and their experiences in the workplace?
Again, if these neurodivergencies aren't diagnosed and understood and managed and realized that they're not disabilities, they are differences, right? So that the person can find means and ways to compensate. We do. So neurodivergence, we tend to think a little bit out of the box. We don't think in a linear, straight line like that. So we're quite resourceful, and figuring things out naturally because the world isn't built for us, right? So for example, I'm an author, but most books are like that, right?
Yeah.
For me, that's a nightmare. I will get lost. I get lost in that. It's impossible for me to read, right? But in other books, this is mine, you see the difference there.
Yeah. More digestible chunks.
Absolutely. But in a world where books are written like this, then immediately it kind of limits you, right? There's a barrier because when it comes to digesting lots of text as a dyslexic person, I have to, you know, if I'm going to do a degree or a master's or something, that's like heavy reading, heavy writing. We've all been there, right? So that's a challenge for even a neurotypical person, right? Who these books are written for and made for and written in a format that's made for them to digest, right? So imagine someone like me having to overcome the challenge of good, you know, doing the academic challenge anyway, and then the constant challenge of navigating this all the time, every day, and trying to do that with distinction. Oh,
tiring.
well, yeah, especially when you're not supported, it's not recognized. It's invisible. These things are invisible, right? These differences are invisible. So mostly people can't see it. So I'm dyslexic, but I happen to be really good at spelling. So it makes people think I'm not dyslexic at all. Right? So it makes so it's easy to be poo-pooed, you know, or fobbed off, or it can't be that bad, you know, and it never really comes to the forefront of people's attention. But what it really is doing is limiting potential.
Absolutely. And I absolutely agree with that. And I just wonder then, with the work that you do with diversity, equity, inclusion, or even the mental health support, how do those conversations happen? Is it the organization themselves looking to provide that support, or is it the individuals themselves, or like a little team within an organization that sees this as a priority?
Yeah, so I've experienced this from like different by different means. So often an organization will contact me through, you know, through one of my platforms or whatever, or for a referral, and then they usually will come to me with kind of a general idea of what they want to do around diversity and inclusion, but they also know that there's a mental health element, and they're not quite sure, you know, how to deliver that. It's all quite vacuous to them.
Yeah.
But again, they're always speaking to the perfect person, because I'm a therapist as well as a, you know, diversity and inclusion champion, you know. So that's where I kind of come together with them, because every time I work with an organization or a group or a charity or a business, I make sure to give them a very specific, tailored, bespoke experience. And I'll tell you why. Because even in therapy, in one-to-one therapy, and this was my experience, and this is spurred on the, you know, the whole birth of cultural consciousness and my book and everything, it really highlighted the need for the understanding of cultural identity, right? And when I say cultural identity, I'm not just talking about ethnicity or nationality. I'm talking about me being a Black, gay, dyslexic man, English Ghanaian, in my 40s, is my cultural identity, right? And it's necessary and very important for the professional or leader that I'm working with to have an understanding and awareness of that cultural identity. Because each of these elements of my cultural identity color my personality, and that's what you're working with.
Yeah.
Now, when we broad brush and cookie cut these approaches, we miss multiple facets of an individual's identity, because neither you or I or anyone else is single faceted. We're diamonds, right? And we have many faces. So if I go to therapy and the therapist is just focused on me being a man, so they think that they're equipped to work with me because I'm a man, we're most probably going to have unsuccessful therapy, right? Because the issues I may be bringing might be around my sexuality or my race or my age or my disability or my neurodivergent, you know, that might be my trauma. That might be the issue I'm bringing. So if they have it's not that they don't have empathy, of course, but you can only empathize so much. So I am not a woman. I've never been a woman. So if a woman comes to me for therapy around women's issues, of course I can help her. But being a good therapist, I'll tell her, I would definitely love to help you, but I know you would have greater success and a greater level of empathy if I refer you to my female counterpart, who is just as great and would love to work with you. You understand?
Yeah.
So that's why it's important for that cultural element to come into therapy and leadership. Because in my experiences of therapy, even training as a therapist, it was a completely white thing. All of my therapy classes were completely white. I was definitely the only Black gay guy, or the other Black person. And the other Black person, who I would be the other two, would definitely be a woman. It would definitely not be another man.
Yeah.
You know, and we'll be such a tiny minority. And when there was any courses at the beginning where there was a higher level of ethnic minority, by the end of the course, most of them had dropped out. The tutors were white all the time. The fathers of psychology that we learn about and praise are all white men. And these were white men developing the field of psychology during the time of slavery and colonialism of Black and brown people, you know, and living in countries that sanctioned this, in countries that carved up Africa and the Americas and the Australias and Asia. So the psychology of a Black and brown man were not considered. And it was during this time that the whole ideology of race came to pass. And it was these people who reinforced that ideology and made it stick to today. Because race is not based on any scientific evidence. It's just the color of skin, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, it seems that the connections between mental health and kind of the diversity and the intersectional diversity of each person is something that organizations haven't understood thoroughly yet, in that I think there is still this approach to diversity, equity, inclusion as this tick box exercise. Let's reduce these people to, I don't know, one or two of these boxes. And I don't know. I don't think that's helpful. But I also understand how it's difficult to kind of cater to an individual as part of a process without using those kinds of avatars and profiles. So I don't know, what do you think?
It's so much easier now. I get what you're saying. I mean, before it was like, how can you be granular? How can you cater to everyone and address everyone? I mean, take, for example, LGBTQIA+. I do not know the lived experience of a trans woman or a trans man, but I'm supposed to be representative of them. If it comes to a corporate space, I could be the representative for a trans woman. I don't. It's not my lived experience.
Yeah.
If it's a gay issue, yes, I know it. I live it. I feel it. It's mine. I get that. I can try, or I can relate it to mine as a gay person and use that to empathize, but it would never be the same. Never be the same, you know. So it's important for us to find different ways, and the birth of AI has given us all of that. So what I do is I have a cultural consciousness quotient for individuals and corporations. And it's a really quick 5-minute survey, and it gauges people's intersectional identity and their level of cultural consciousness in a snapshot. And I use AI to process all of that data. And I use that data to tailor my workshops and interactions so it's tailored to each individual.
That's so clever.
Very simple to do, right? We've got all the tools and technologies out there now. So when corporations give an excuse to say that we can't tailor, we can't be personalized. No, now is an excuse because you heard it here first. You just use tools and you do it. Technology will allow you to do it. Why the hell do we have AI that has, such a powerful processing speeds and all that? It's to be used for good. Yes, use it to get a granular snapshot, on where corporations and companies are in their intersectional awareness, in their cultural consciousness, and in the cultural makeup of their organizations, so that they can really hit the mark, instead of these broad brushed approaches that kind of would maybe hit some. For example, I find when I go to workplaces, a lot of them say, oh, and they're really proud of it. I think they should be, because they're like, we've got mental health volunteers, we've trained them up, so people can go and they can, if they've got mental health problems, they can chat to someone. And I'm like, oh, that's really good. How many of them are from cultural minorities? And they're like, oh. And I'm like, well, something that you did that was made to be really inclusive and supportive and empowering actually marginalized a group of people because they don't see themselves represented there at all. So if an employee who is Black or gay wants to go and speak to a mental health volunteer about being Black and gay, are they going to speak to a white woman, a white straight woman about it? How comfortable are they going to feel to do that?
Yeah, or feel that they're not thoroughly
understood. Because that's what you need to feel understood to feel comfortable, right? That's the whole kind of promise of therapy. When people are therapists dating, and that on that consultation, what people are really doing is offloading, and they're like, can this person hold this? Can they really understand it to me? Can they break it back to me and give me something that I couldn't see before? And if they can, then that's my therapist.
Yeah. So really what we're saying is for when organizations are looking at providing these kind of support services and resources for their workers, they need to be mindful of doing a good thing for the sake of doing a good thing and not actually having an impact, because they're not truly thinking about what it is that they're trying to do.
Because what happens, the minority staff don't uptake the service and they're like, oh, well, minority staff don't want it. It's like, no, it's not that. You're missing the trick. You're not being culturally conscious. And we're not saying make the mental health volunteers every color of the rainbow. We're saying teach them cultural consciousness. Teach them to be aware of their own cultural identity and be aware of the other person's cultural identity, so they can navigate the power dynamics in between those identities to have a harmonious outcome. That's all that it is. So for example, you can have I could go for therapy with a Black therapist and have unsuccessful therapy because he's culturally unconscious. Maybe no thought of his own. Maybe he's never researched his ancestry, never his culture, never spoken his language a day in his life. Maybe, who knows? But to me, they will miss that cultural element that I might need in my therapy, right? But I can also go with a white therapist who's culturally conscious and have great therapy, and I have. So it's not really a matter of color. And that's what my cultural consciousness is kind of taking it away from, because when it brings it down to color, people can easily poo-poo it and say, you know what is it down to quotas? Does it have to be? I'm like, no, it's not down to color, but it's about cultural identity and recognizing that there must be a diverse cultural identity in there so that there can be greater empathy towards minorities.
Yeah. And I just have to ask, I guess, like when it comes to the outcomes of the work that you do, either for the individuals or for the organizations, what kind of outcomes do you see as a part of the work that you do in these?
Oh, yeah. I mean, as a therapist, I'm blessed every day, and I know I'm blessed every day to see a client light up when the load is lifting and sprout when it's over. Oh, well, it's incredible. What's even more incredible is when you see that en masse. And I've seen sometimes in workshops like spontaneous support groups growing. You know, people who were, you know, minorities who felt disempowered, didn't have the resources, didn't have the tools, didn't have the know-how, felt misunderstood, didn't have the vocabulary to even express themselves in the right way, feel empowered and say, I'm staying now and I'm doing this because I'm passionate about it and I'm gonna advocate for myself and others. And I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
That I live for that. You
Yeah.
know, I live for that because I know that what is happening is a psychological empowerment for both the minority and the majority in the room.
Yeah.
Which is bringing us a little bit closer together, you know. And if I was able to bring mankind closer together, even just a little bit, through the little work that I do, then
Yeah.
I'm a happy man, right?
Yeah.
Because I felt the marginalization and the compounding effects. You know, being Black is one thing. Being a Black man is another. Being a Black gay man is another thing. Being a Black gay dyslexic man is even another, right? Being a Black gay dyslexic man living in England, you know, identifying as English before Ghanaian, because I was born and raised here, and that's my cultural identity. But my ancestral identity, you know, where my roots are and my traditions are from Ghana. So having to navigate all of that, plus the intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, racial trauma, and all these compounding effects on our mental health. And then the childhood trauma that we all experience in one shape, form, or another. That as adults, we have to, you know, I say un-F ourselves from, to say it politely.
Yeah.
Right? So we realize that for Black and intersectional minorities, it's an ocean of pressure upon the tiny mind. And they have to swim to the top so they can breathe, so we can breathe, so we can finally breathe. So far from the surface, can't even see the light sometimes. And the pressure is overwhelming because you know, all of these things are a lifetime of therapy within itself. Intergenerational trauma is a life, you know, it's therapy in itself. Historical trauma and its effects on us is therapy in itself. Racial trauma is therapy in itself. Childhood trauma is therapy in itself.
Yeah.
You know, and then you come to the effects of homophobia on mental health. That's therapy in itself.
Yeah.
You know, and then, you know, so you realize that as we go along and we realize that our identity isn't as simple as we think. You know, sometimes I walk into a boardroom and it's white men and it looks like that at a snapshot, right? Like, oh, a room of 10 white men and maybe one white woman.
Yeah.
You know, but when we do cultural consciousness exercises, we realize that it's not just a group of white men and one white woman. It's a group of white, gay, non-binary, you know, Catholic, Protestant, Swedish, you know, Saxon, you know, whatever, you name it, autistic.
Yeah.
And then they realize that it's more colorful than you think. If you just look through an intersectional lens. And through seeing that color, we can have a greater empathy because it's highly unlikely to be privileged in every aspect of our cultural identity.
Yeah.
We must know how it feels to be marginalized in one. And if we can have that, then we can at least feel it and know it, you know, because it's not sympathy that people look for, is empathy.
Yeah, and
We don't want people to feel sorry for us. We want people to understand.
yes, absolutely. And I do want to touch on your book in just a second. But just before we do, I just wanted to ask the question, is this the place for organizations to start? Is cultural consciousness the place where they need to begin? Or is there something perhaps they need leadership, advocacy, or sponsorship in order to bring these kinds of initiatives about?
It starts with bridging the gap between mental health and well-being in the workplace and diversity, equity, equality, and inclusion, and not treating them as two separate things. Mm-hmm. We bring them together with cultural consciousness and intersectionality first. That's the linchpin. And then it's a trickle-down effect. So it comes from the leadership taking these cultural consciousness and intersectionality training and education, mm-hmm. not doing an hour lunch and learn on Black History Month and not even accepting a free follow-up. I get so frustrated with corporations that I even offer a free follow-up because they're not willing to do that. And I know the importance of a follow-up because otherwise it just sits on the brain somewhere. You need a follow-up to lock it in. But they're like, no, I'm busy. You know, you don't have the time. I'm like, I'm very busy. And I'm offering it for free.
Yeah.
You know, it's quite bizarre to me. And it's also difficult being that intersectional minority myself and coming up against those responses. You're like, if only you were me, you'd know how it feels and you'd do something about it. Yeah. But because you're not, and you're looking at it from a really different perspective, then there's no impetus, you know, to really follow up. So I think it's really important for the leadership to really take the training course, at least be present in the workshops, at least come, attend, please. You know, because there's no point hiring top talent, you know, getting all of your employees in there, paying the money, me designing the best experience I possibly can to deliver a message, and the leadership aren't even there.
So disappointing.
I mean, what message does that communicate? Yeah. You know, if we communicated silently, what does that communicate? You know? So subconsciously to the employees in the room, what are they understanding from this? You know, and then it affects, you know, apart from it affecting, you know, employee mental health and well-being, it will affect your bottom line. You will become a dinosaur and you will die out because after a while, I mean, it's law now, Equality Act, right? It's law now. So after a while, it will become unsustainable to not become culturally conscious and look at your staff through an intersectional lens, because people are more and more aware of what our identity means to us and what our mental health means to us after COVID. People are clued right up. Yeah. And we ain't having it anymore.
I've written that down. You will become a dinosaur and die out. I think that's brilliant. I've written it down. Keep that. So let's just quickly talk about your book then. Can you tell us a little bit about what it is, who it's aimed at, and what it's trying to convince them of?
So it's right here. I'm so proud of it. It's called Why Talking Therapy Can't Think in Black. I know the title is very
provocative, yeah.
But it's intended to be, because it was through my experience of racism while seeking mental health care over and over and over again, being called aggressive, you know, being told that they can't work with me anymore and not really explaining why, being left a refund for my next session on a reception desk, you know, there's so many instances I can bring up, but you think therapists are supposed to be the loveliest, sweetest, non-judgmental things, right? And I'm sure they were. But what they didn't realize is that they had subconscious, unconscious biases, they stereotyped me, and for someone who had to overcome the cultural barriers to seek therapy in the first place, because white people of color say therapy is a white people's thing. And maybe it is, because as I said, the forefathers of psychology did not design psychotherapy for someone like me and mine, that's for sure. Freud was not thinking about me when he was developing psychoanalysis.
Perhaps not, no.
Probably. But it's highly improbable.
Yeah.
But not impossible, but
No.
highly improbable. So what I do is I overlap the timeline of slavery, colonialism, and neocolonialism, and the development of mental health care as we see it today, and all the modalities that even I practice. So I practice cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic programming, person-centered therapy, a few other modalities as well, rational emotive behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. And these are all, created and designed by forefathers. But when you dig deep, you realize that some of them were actually racist, held racist views. A lot of the medical journals posted highly racist mental health diagnoses that justified slave owners keeping their slaves. So stuff like drapetomia was like a laziness of Black people, and it's cured by whipping. Just like disgusting things like this that were actually documented medical science at the time. And it was these guys who, I was forced to almost look up to as the fathers of my field, whilst I was training. It's really, I don't know, it's very conflicting for me, even now thinking about it, and that spurred me on to highlight it so people are fully aware of it, because every time I experience racism and I fed it back to any of the groups that I was studying with at the time, because I did different modalities, the response was always like all the air was sucked out. They were so shocked, like flabbergasted. And I'm like, this happened so many times. But because they're all white and well-meaning and therapists and, learning to become therapists, and, all therapy is very kumbaya when we're learning it. So, it's very sharing and, together and bonding, and it's very like that. So I was like, Jarell, oh my God. And I'm like, this has happened like 3 or 4 times in a row from different therapists. It just let me realize that not only do other therapists don't even realize that they could be actually doing it too, because it's so subtle. So it's me explaining, my therapist asking me what my passions are, me explaining what my passions are, and when I land, my therapist saying, Jarell, I'm sensing aggression.
Wow. Yeah.
But it's very subtle, right? But it punches you in the face like a ton of bricks, because you're like, immediately I felt the need to defend myself. So I was like, no, I'm not aggressive. It's just that when I talk, sometimes I gesticulate and I was just talking about my passions, and that makes me more higher energy. I was really trying to explain the difference between passion and aggression to my therapist. And then she kicked me out of therapy.
Which is not a position anyone wants to be put in, really, is it? To have that emotion and...
Yeah, but you realize the frequency of it. I mean, as it happened to me, that highlighted it. I didn't even know it was a thing. racism and microaggressions within therapy and stereotyping. I did not, there wasn't a module of it. And there still isn't a module of it, and I've been advocating for it in almost all of the a few schools that, and a lot of them are like, we don't need it. And I'm like, so there's still a lot of resistance. It's a frustrating field, I find myself in, or I guess we find ourselves in, trying to kind of break glass ceilings and change perceptions and change hearts and find allies and empower people, especially when people are like,
Just before we finish, we've spoken so much and it's been so interesting kind of learning about you and the work that you're doing and your perspective on these issues. But is there something that perhaps we haven't touched on that you would like to bring to the forefront before we finish?
I think it's really important in conversations around DEI in the workplace or in society as a whole, that it doesn't become an us-them conversation, and I think without incorporating cultural consciousness into that, it often does, and it puts the majority, which is often, white, straight, Christian, or now atheist people at the, in the kind of privileged or dominant group, and it makes speaking about these subjects a bit uncomfortable, right? And it's met with a lot of resistance as well, and a lot of guilt or shame or anger or whatever it is. There's a myriad of emotions that come with these conversations, and for the minorities as well, sometimes it feels like, oh, that again. oh, woe is us, poor us. It kind of keeps in that stale, stagnant narrative, but I think it's time for us to elevate it and not be placing fingers of blame, because, I mean, I wasn't around 500 years ago when slavery and stuff started. I'm sure you weren't. I mean, none of us were, so we can't be placing fingers of blame. But what we can do is take responsibility and ownership for what we do here right now, once we're aware of what we're doing and educating ourselves. That's what we can do. We can't go and undo the past. We can't carry the guilt of our forefathers. And no, it's not a healthy practice. But what we can do is look around and see what can we do now, and how can we look at things differently, and how can we be more empathetic to ourselves first, because a lot of people who lack empathy towards others, you find that they lack it for themselves. They haven't even internalized it yet, so once we find empathy for ourselves and others, then things become a little bit smoother, and we learn to embrace and celebrate each other's differences rather than use it as marks to divide us, because that's what happens with, when DEI, or even like a term like woke, is turned on its head and made to sound like something really dirty. Like, I like to be woke, and woke is like awake and aware, right? I want to be awake and aware. I don't want to be asleep. I guess the opposite of woke would be sleep. I don't want to be asleep, but it makes it almost heavy on the tongue to say I'm woke. Yeah. Because it's become such a dirty word. It means something quite different. But no, it just means being aware and conscious and trying to do better. And I think that's okay. I think it's a good thing.
I agree. I'd certainly prefer to be awake than unconscious. So I think that's everything for today. We've run out of time, but for anyone who is looking to get in touch with you or to get access to your book, we'll provide the links on our website at theuwi.com/podcast. They'll also be available on the hub for anyone who wants to register and access them on there. But Jarell, I just wanted to thank you for taking the time to talk with me today, to share your experiences as well, particularly. It's always great to hear about people's lived experiences and how that informs the work that they do, and your insights. It's been an incredibly valuable conversation.
Oh, thank you so much, Erica. You've been a great host. I've loved every minute chatting with you. My eyes have been pleased with the rainbow layout of your bookshelf, which is amazing.
Yes,
So thank you so much.
About my books. So yes. Thank you for noticing.
Whenever you want me back. And don't forget, buy a copy of your book, get the link on the website, and I'll be happy to, anytime you want me back, just give me a call.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much, Jarell.
Thank you. Have a good day.